Hello and welcome. I'm James Yates and this is just a brief introduction to coding. We're going to talk about some basic coding concepts here that include data and data types, variables, conditions, loops, functions, array, and objects and hashes. This is going to primarily be in JavaScript and Ruby, probably exclusively. But I think these concepts really are kind of language agnostic, so it doesn't really matter what language you're using. But yeah, I'll be using probably Ruby for most of this and then maybe a little JavaScript. So let's just go ahead and get right into this and let's talk about data and data types. So first of all, what is data? And my explanation of this is it's just the units we use to describe, qualify, and quantify all the stuff in the world. So there's all these things in the world, and we kind of need a way to organize it and describe it to one another and to quantify it. And for example, we could look at this group of people and we could ask ourselves, what data is here? What data could we abstract from this picture? Or just from a group of people. I could look at people and I could say, hey, every person has a height. And, height could be inches, it could be in centimeters, but they all have this height. I could kind of sort the people by height from shortest to tallest, tallest to shortest. Maybe I could make a group of people, of all the people who are over 6 feet tall. I could look at an individual person and I could say, each individual, they're going to have a name, an age, a date of birth, a city of birth, maybe an occupation, hair color, eye color, diet, etc., etc. But each person is going to have their own values of each of these attributes. Like every person is going to have an age, but depending on the person, those values are going to be different. With this data, I could then, group them by age, I could group them by hair color, I could group them by income, sort them by income. Yeah, so there's a lot of data here. And there's also things like maybe their clothes. Their clothes might have like a manufacturer, might have a price, might have a, location made. So there is a ton of data here. And that's just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. There's probably just an infinite amount of data points we could come up with if we're trying to describe people. So yeah, we talked about height. We could look at individual height. There could be an average height of the group. We could pull the shortest person. We could pull the tallest. Maybe we could just ask, is someone over 6 feet? We saw, we could look at an individual person and all the attributes on that. We could kind of take a group of the people and kind of, or maybe organize them by like hair color or hair length or weight or age. Then we could look at all the things associated with the people like clothes, maybe backpacks, stuff like that. Now something that we need to talk about when we're thinking about data is what kind of data type it is. We kind of do this intuitively as humans, but with the computer, we really need to be explicit on telling the computer about what type of data this is going to be. So this is how the computer is going to know how to use it. So let's look at some basic data types or some common data types that we'll see in coding. So one of the most common ones is numbers. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of numbers in computing and programming language. Computers are very good working with numbers. And numbers can even be broken down into things like integers or floats, which are essentially decimal numbers. But that's kind of just at a high level. We have numbers. The next common thing we're going to see is strings. So strings are just a string of characters, like a password, or like your name, or a description of a clothing item. It's just really alphanumeric text. Next common one is Boolean, and this can be one of two values, which is just true or false. We also have in some languages like this null or nil value, which just indicates that there's no value. So it's a value for no value. Some other common data types are arrays. These are just how we can create lists of things. So list of data, very common. We can have lists of numbers, we can have lists of strings, we can have arrays of arrays, we could have arrays of objects. So you can really mix and match this stuff. The next thing we're going to see is objects. So these are really in hashes and Rubies, but really what you're going to see in a lot of languages and most languages is just a way to do key value pairs. For example, in our picture example, we had people. Now we could describe a person as an object where they have an age and a name. So each person's going to have an age and a name. Those are going to be our keys, but the values are going to be what it is for that individual person. So if we had a person named John and they were 12, or I could have a person named Sally and she was 30. There's other data types, and you can actually, in some languages, you can define your own types of data. So why is this important? Why is it important for us to understand data types? Well, it's just needed for programming. Like the programming language needs to know what kind of data, because it needs to just kind of manage that. It's also important for us as programmers because we need to understand that different types of data can do different things. So with numbers, we can do math. We can add, divide, subtract, that kind of thing. Strings are good for, general descriptions of stuff, and there's going to be different methods on strings. Like maybe we can grab the length of how many characters are in a string. Booleans are going to be good for our logic, with this and or not logic, and they're going to come in big when we talk about conditionals. Arrays, these are going to be good when we want to have a list of things. We want to loop over a list of things and do something, or we want to filter a list into a sublist. So it's a way to organize and update items. Objects are good at describing common things in the real world. So like we saw our person, that could be a person object. We could have a car object that describes all cars. Car would have like a make, model, etc. And it's really important for us to help. If we know the type of data, we're going to have a better understanding of our data. And it's also really going to help us prevent errors, because we're going to see if we're not really paying attention to our data, we can run into some kind of errors with coding. So yeah, let's go ahead and do a little demo on this. So I have this right here, and I'll throw this code here in a link, and I'd recommend you type it out. But this really just goes through our basic types of data in Ruby. So I have a Ruby file named demo.rb, and I can come in here and I can run this by making sure I have my terminal open. So to get my terminal, I can do Control Tick. I can go to in VS Code, I can go terminal, I can go view and click this terminal and expand that. And then to run this, I can run ruby demo.rb. And that runs that. So if I see one.class and 1.0, I have two different number classes in Ruby, integers and floats. I have my string class. I don't have a Boolean class. I have a true class and a false class, but those are essentially Booleans. I have this nil class. I have an array, and then I also have this hash that we see being printed down here. I had to throw this hash in a variable, just something I had to do for this to get this to print out. We won't really get into that. So here's kind of our basic data types in Ruby. So let's go through and just briefly kind of see what we can do and why, and kind of look at some examples why this matters. So to comment this out, because I don't want to print this out anymore, but I want to leave it, I can select the whole thing and do Command \\, and that comments out all of that code. So let's talk about numbers really quick. So with numbers, we can add. So we can do all of our basic operations like add, we can subtract, we can divide with the \, and we can times with the star. Let's just run this. So we get 1 + 1 is 2, 1 - 1 is 0, 1 divided by 1 is 1, and 2 times 2 is 4. So those are all common. Another common type of operation that we're going to see in programming language is the modulus. And this is done with the %. And what the modulus does is this gives us the remainder of division. So for example, 2 divided by 2 is 1 with no remainder. So this is going to be 0. If I do 3 mod 2, well, 2 goes into 3 one times and it gives me a remainder of 1. So this is going to be 1. So that's what the modulus is. It's actually used, it's probably something you might have not heard of, but it is used, you'll see it being used in coding quite a bit. So, like I said, with numbers, we can do math. I think no surprise there. But let's kind of look at an example of where we might get mixed up with our data types. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to put 3 divided by 2. Now 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. Now if I run this, I get 1. Now this is because these are integers, so it's dividing an integer by an integer, and so Ruby is saying, oh, well, if you're dividing an integer by an integer, let me give you an integer back. And with integers, I can't do decimals. So it's just going to cut off that 0.5. That might be what you want to do, it might not. If you do want the decimal, I have to make one of these a float. So now if I do 3.0 divided by 2, now it's going to be a float divided by an integer. And then Ruby will say, okay, well, I'll give you a float back for that one. So there's a little got you on that one with numbers. Just a quick little demonstration of why data types matter and why they might cause an error down the road. But yeah, let's also look at strings. So with strings, we do quotes. And with Ruby, I can call methods on these. So I can do like a length. So maybe I want to find the length of my string, i.e. how many characters are in there. Oop, spelled puts wrong, puts. So hello has the length of 5. I could like upcase my string. Didn't save that. You gotta make sure before you run these, you always save it. So that could upcase my string. And there's a lot of methods on these strings. I don't want to go too much into these methods until we, kind of wait until we talk about, variables and functions. But what I kind of want to get at is different data types are going to have different functionality. Like, I'm not going to be able to call upcase on an integer. That's going to give me an error, undefined method upcase for integer. So, and this is a very useful error because it's just telling me, hey, the integer data type or class does not have this upcase method. String does. I mean, we can't really upcase 3. Here's another thing where data types matter. What happens if I try to add the string 3 plus 3? This also gives me an error because Ruby doesn't know how to add the string 3 with an integer. JavaScript would actually have this equal the string 33. But Ruby says, hey, you're trying to add a string and an integer. That really doesn't make sense. Now I can add 2 strings together. That gives me 33. It just really takes the 2 strings together and it concatenates them together. So I can add 2 strings together. Can I minus 2 strings? I can't minus 2 strings, that's an error. All right. Let's talk about true and false. So our Booleans, we can just type in true. So these are reserved words. And with Booleans, I can go ahead and put true. I'm just going to put true. Now with Booleans, I can do a lot. I can do Boolean algebra. So I can do true. And this pipe sign, this is or. Now, if something, now you know this, if I give you a condition, if I say like if it is Monday or the day ends in Y, that's going to be true because all days end in Y, whether or not it's true or whether or not it's Monday. So we can do logic like this. It's true or false is going to be true. But if I do true and false, that means both things would have to be true. So that's false. And then there's also the not. And we'll talk more about this when we get to conditionals, but just kind of want to do a brief intro into the Boolean data type. So we have true or false. Those are the 2 types, but then we have these and or not operators that we can call with these. Okay. So let's go into arrays. So to create an array in Ruby, just use the brackets, and then we can separate things by commas. For instance, I can call the length method on this. And then this way I can see how many things I have in a array. Another thing I can do with arrays is, maybe I could sample. So the sample method in Ruby is going to grab me a random thing from the array. It's just going to pull a random one out. I'm going to throw this into a variable. We haven't talked about variables yet, but I'm going to create a variable, assign it to an array. This is how we're going to access arrays. And we're going to talk about arrays in more depth later, but arrays are 0 index based. And what this means, let's say I have an array of strings. You can just say A, B, C, D. So if I want to access this, really what at the top of this is what's considered the 0 index. This is the first index, and this is the second index. So if I want to access something from an array, I can do it with the index. So if I want to grab the first thing, I can use my variable x and then grab the 0 index, which will give me A. If I want to grab the last thing, I'll just grab that second index. If I try to go out, my 3, like I don't have a third index, so this is just going to be blank. If I want to see that value, remember here's our nil value, so I'm trying to access this index that does not exist in this array. So what it's going to get back is it's going to get back that nil class. So there's that nil So there's arrays. We're going to talk about arrays more in a bit, but let's talk about our objects, or these are called hashes in Ruby. And we do it with curly brackets. So say for instance, and I'm just going to name this variable like James, that's me. So I have an age of 38, I believe, and I have a name, James. Let's do this with an uppercase. So now if I want to access my age, that's how I can do it. Kind of like I did with the array, I'm going to use the brackets, but instead of getting the index of it, I'm going to grab the key, and then I'm going to throw this symbol right here. So I can now grab my age, 38. So there's the hash. So this is just a brief introduction to all of this stuff. We're going to go into a lot more detail with this, but down in this introduction, but the key takeaway here is, we have all these different data types, numbers, strings, Booleans, nils, arrays, hashes, or objects. And the different kinds of data, we can do different operations with them and call different methods on them. And we need to be careful because, like we saw with the division, like 3 divided by 2, that gives us 1 because it does integer division. And certain data types are going to have certain methods that are going to be useful to us. For example, this sample method on the array. This gives us a good way to grab a random thing from our array. And just as a demo, let me pull this up. Let me just show you just array methods in Ruby. Come in here and pull up their docs. So here's all the methods that we have on arrays. So there's a lot of these useful methods. This is probably about, 100 methods that we can call on arrays. And these are really going to help us, do stuff with lists. So yeah, let's, as far as that, we can go ahead, stop the video here, and then we'll get into variables next. Leave any questions you have in the comments, and yeah, we can see if we can answer those for you.